Okay, brilliant. Okay, so I'll just introduce you to Luke from Buttle UK, who's going to talk about chances for children this afternoon as part of our ReferKent Relay Week sessions. Feel free to use the chat function if you've got any questions as we go along. If not, then please wait to the end, put your hand up as we go along, and feel free to sort of use your mic to ask questions in person. I'll be quiet now and hand over to Luke.
Thank you, Mark. I hope everyone can hear me okay. It's nice to see some familiar names here. Yeah, my name's Luke. I work within the grants team at Buttle UK. But we'll get started then. So in the next 25 minutes or so, I want to tell you a bit about Buttle, about how we work, about what's relevant to you about that potentially in some of your areas of expertise. So to start off, I always like to make it clear what Buttle means. We're actually named after our founder, Frank Buttle. He was a reverend in the East End of London. He kind of made it his life's mission to raise £1 million for children in the East End. And he felt agonizingly sure before his death in 1953 or just before then. So Buttle was established actually directly after then. So as a children's charity, we've been around for about 70 years. And we sort of joke internally that Buttle, it could be our unofficial strapline, the best children's charity you've never heard of. But I'll just touch on kind of like exactly what we do. And in essence, we've not changed our kind of core aim within that whole time. Still, fundamentally, we are there to support the education and the well-being of kids who have recently come through a really difficult time in their lives. We're a children's charity, we're a crisis charity, and we're a grant giving charity. Now, I mentioned that £1 million that Frank Buttle was trying to raise. We now award about £5 million every year. So we've grown a bit in that time, but our core purpose has changed. Our core purpose has stayed the same. And in terms of the southeast of England, in your area, I think we'd awarded something like £430,000 to around 500 children last year. Most of our funding comes from the National Lottery, but not all of it. We actually have 2 different funding programs through which we award grants to children. I'm only going to talk about one of those funding programs because I think it's the most relevant to you, and it's also the one through which we award like 95% of our grants. Just for your information, the other one is we support a handful of children every year into boarding school when they can't stay at home for whatever reason. But we're going to be focusing on our Chances for Children program. So, as I mentioned before, Buttle is a crisis funder. We are a grant giving charity. We're there to support the prospects of kids who have recently come through a traumatic experience or a crisis. With our grants, they can be up to about £2,400. That's within a household. We'll award that amount, not per child. So these are big grants that cover lots of stuff, a range of different items or activities designed to support the education and the well-being of kids. That's one of the things that sets us apart from other charities that are similar to us. These are kind of big grants. We don't consider applications for funding consisting of mainly household items. We do touch on that a bit, but we want most of our money to go towards stuff more directly supporting children's education, for example. Now, why is this relevant to you, or why I hope it's relevant to you? Well, Buttle doesn't accept applications directly from children, young people, or families. we only accept funding applications from frontline professionals working directly with young people. And there's a couple of reasons for that. But that's broadly speaking how we work. I wanted to touch a little bit on actually like a typical case that we might receive, just to kind of flesh that out for you before I move on to telling you a bit more about actually how we pay our grants. So, as I said before, we're a crisis funder. There are certain crises that we can't consider just because we don't have enough money to support everybody experiencing that thing. An example of that would be where the crisis is, the family have been evicted from their home. We all know about the housing shortage and kind of wider housing issues. We simply wouldn't have enough money for that to even touch. And also what I was saying before about our grants not consisting of mainly household items. If housing is the issue, then that happens. So that's one example of a case that a crisis that we wouldn't consider. About 60% of the applications we fund relate to when a family has had to flee domestic abuse. Now, we're not strictly a domestic abuse charity, but that is one of the crises that we spend a lot of money trying to support in relation to the children's education. So really, that's a case of a professional who's working with the family because of that domestic abuse. Perhaps it was referred to your service via the police. Perhaps it was referred to your service via the children's school who raised concerns. An assessment was made by the children's services and it was deemed at a high enough threshold for support. And that family have an allocated social worker now. So that would be the kind of example where we might be able to consider funding. It could be an older young person who's ran away from home for whatever reason. We might be able to consider funding there. It could be a bereavement of one of the children's parents. Unfortunately, we do get those applications. It could be where, for whatever reason, one of the parents or both parents couldn't cope with the children anymore, and the children went to live, for example, with a relative in what we might call a kinship care arrangement. We might be able to fund in that case. So those are all examples of crises which have recently happened to a child that would have impacted their education. Perhaps they're out of school while they find another school in the new area. Perhaps because of trauma, they've not been able to attend school for a while. And it would have affected their well-being as well. They might have witnessed abuse. They might have directly experienced abuse. Now, the family do have to have taken an element of positive action away from that point of crisis in order for Buttle to be able to consider, because there's a question there of what our money achieves at that point of crisis. So the family has to have taken positive action to some degree, and there's space in an application form to you to tell us what that looks like. For the cases we can help with, I want to tell you a bit about actually how we award our grants, because we don't accept applications directly from the families. We also don't award funding directly to the families. There's a few reasons for that. But for the cases we can help with, what happens is that grant goes to the support worker, the professional that submitted that application on behalf of the family. And it would then form part of your job as the professional to spend that grant. Now, that grant comes to you in the form of what's called a prepaid card. It looks just like a debit card. It's not a debit card. It's basically a gift card, but one that can be used anywhere, more or less, online or in store. It comes with your name, the professional's name, properly embossed on it like a debit card would look. It comes through the post, and it then forms part of that professional's job to hold onto that card and buy the stuff that we agreed to fund. They've got to tell us what they spent the money on by providing us with the receipts. And they get 2 months to do that. Again, we're a crisis funder, so the idea is we want these kids to benefit from this stuff quickly. Now, already at 15 minutes, I want to give plenty of time for Q&A, so just a few other bits to tie up. I mean, there's lots of things which I've only just touched upon there. I've not defined any terms in terms of what we mean by children, what we mean by a recent crisis, what we mean by crisis. So there's a lot more to it than I've mentioned there, but hopefully that's given you an idea of who Buttle is, the kind of stuff that we would consider funding, and how we pay our grants. Just a few tips before we get on to Q&As here. First tip, and I'd give this to anybody, Buttle is a very approachable funder in comparison to some others. At the end of these slides, there will be my phone number. If you want to discuss an application before you take the time to complete it, that's absolutely fine. You can get through to me directly on that number. I've got a caseload of 125 currently. So that's 125 grants out there across Kent, as well as the rest of the South East and some of South London as well, that I manage day to day to make sure that money's getting spent. So do give us a call if you think this opportunity might be suitable for a young person who you're working with or a family who you're working with. The other thing I would say as a tip is check our funding criteria. That sets out the rules upon which we would agree to fund, or we would be able to even consider an application form. You'd be surprised at the amount of people that don't do that. You wouldn't, apply for a job application before you'd read the job criteria. And I'd say it's exactly the same when you're looking for funding. It's all on our website. I've got a link to it on the slides, which you'll get later as well. Another tip I would give is when it comes to the application form, keep it simple. We see this particularly with children's services or social services more generally. When it comes to an application, you want to put down the entire 10-year family history of involvement with children's services, and we don't need that. Again, as a crisis funder, we need a snapshot of what's happened recently, specific reason why you're submitting this application form now. We don't need to know about certain instances that happened 10 years ago. I say this to everybody. There's 3 things when it comes around to an application form, and the application form is relatively short. It only takes 30 minutes to maybe 60 minutes to apply if you're doing it with the family. Tell us what's happened. Tell us how the kids have been affected in relation to their education and their well-being. Tell us what stuff you could buy that would address some of those issues in the children. At its most simplest, that's what we want to see. And then just finally, a couple of good to know bits. Buttle's application success rate is about 60%, which might not sound that high. I've worked for other funders where application success rate was 10%, i.e. you get 10 applications in and you've got enough money just to support one of them. So I've been in a very fortunate position where I am able to fund most of the applications we receive. Those that I'm not able to fund are often ineligible for a key part of our essential criteria, which again is in the funding criteria. Application turnaround, typically 2 to 3 days. What I mean by that is if you submitted an application for funding for us today, we would probably contact you this week to discuss that application. And if it were eligible, you would probably be offered that grant maybe by Friday afternoon, if not very early next week. Again, we're a crisis funder, so we do want this money to get out there quickly. We call, as grants officers, of which I am one, we call almost everybody who applies. So go back to what I was saying about wanting to try and fit loads into an application form. Don't feel like you have to. If all of the key information is there, and unless it's a very clear no, we will give you a call to discuss it. And we just find that's the best way to save you time with the application side of things. And it also means that you're not having to commit to writing maybe certain sensitive things that you'd rather not in relation to the family circumstances. Now, because it's the professional who manages the grants, we do say just have one grant at a time. We do get people submit multiple applications, and we have found that if we give them more than one grant, it can be really difficult. I'm always very upfront. This is more work for you to manage the money, and I know how precious your time is and how tight, you know, your time is, and how big your caseloads are. You can always submit more than one application at a time if you wish, but you're only going to get awarded one grant at a time. That being said, there's no limit ultimately to how many grants you could receive. I awarded nearly £30,000 to one professional in relation to families on their caseload last year. And there's no limit on how many applications an agency can receive, which there is for some funders, but not Buttle. All right, I think that was everything that I needed to run by you. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but we've got just under 10 minutes now for any questions that anyone might have.
Thanks, Luke, for that information. I haven't got any questions in the chat at the moment. I don't know if anyone's going to wants to come off mute and sort of ask any questions verbally, but I've got one to start with. You'd mentioned that you said you hadn't specified what you meant by a child or young person. Is there a particular age ranges or exemptions to any particular individuals?
So basically, the age appropriate ranges are 2 to 18. Now, we do allow for applications for young people up to the age of 20. So we do go beyond that definition of 2 to 18, but they have to be engaged in some kind of further education. Typically, the young people who we support are aged 18 to 20 are those who have become estranged from their family for whatever reason. Perhaps they're living in semi-supported accommodation, which might be provided by the local authority. They're at college or they're doing an apprenticeship. They're trying their best in relation to their education. But the idea is, you know, they might have been left traumatized, isolated. They might have had to take time out of college while they moved away from their family. So the idea is, what kind of stuff could Buttle fund to help address those kind of things in those cases? And typically that might be some home furnishings for their new flat, but it might also be predominantly a laptop for the college and college equipment, and even just clothes. If they've had to leave home with nothing, like just with the clothes on their back, we'll fund clothes. If they've had to move out of area, we'll fund activity costs to enable them to make new friends or pursue a hobby. So there was an application I received the other day. It was actually for a young person who was seeking asylum into the UK. He'd come from Afghanistan and had unfortunately witnessed his parents be killed. And he was at college, he was studying, but he just had nothing. And of course, if you're an asylum seeking young person, you don't get the same benefits. So in that case, they were really into cricket. So among other things, we funded him cricket equipment, and he was able to start at a local cricket club with that equipment. And of course, there were other things as well. I think we funded a laptop and some household items. I hope that answers that one, Mark.
So yeah, so thank you everyone, and thank you, Luke, particularly for presenting this afternoon and for joining the session. Oh, we got a hand up. Hello. I know, thumbs up. Oh, right, okay, it's all right. Panic over.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone else. I hope you found that useful. And yeah, like I say, my contact details are going to be on the bottom of those slides. If you've got a specific case that you want to discuss, I'm more than happy to do that.